Margot Hayes stood quietly in her kitchen, clutching a store-bought cake that now felt more like a cruel joke than a celebration. The pink frosting read, "Congratulations on your retirement." But the shaky letters looked rushed, like someone scribbled it without care. She had picked it up that morning, thinking it would be a placeholder until her real party began. Her children had promised they'd be over by 6 p.m. sharp. It was now 6:17. Margot glanced at the clock again, her fingers brushing invisible lint from her favorite navy blue dress, the one her late husband always said brought out the gold in her eyes. She had cooked all their favorite dishes: lemon roasted chicken for Ben, gluten-free pasta for Jenna's wife, and baked mac and cheese for Oliver's twins. She even set out sparkling cider for the grandkids. Everything was perfect, except the house was quiet. Too quiet. No doorbell. No knock. No screech of little feet scrambling across the tile. She checked her phone for the 5th time, sure she must have missed a message. But there was nothing. No texts. No calls. Just the 2 gray check marks next to the last message she sent in their family group chat. "So excited to see you all tonight. Love, Mom." It had been seen, but not answered. Margot swallowed hard, her throat tightening as her eyes drifted to the table. The cake was already starting to sweat, condensation pooling slightly under the plastic lid. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to light the candles anymore. This wasn't the first time they had let her down, but it was the first time it truly hurt. Deeply. Irrevocably. Over the past few years, their excuses had all started to sound the same. "Sorry, Mom, work's been crazy. We'll make it up to you next weekend." Or the ever-familiar, "Can we reschedule?" First, she forgave it. She understood that life got busy. She had spent 4 decades balancing the chaos of lesson plans, parent-teacher nights, and 3 kids of her own. She knew what it meant to be stretched thin. But this was different. She had spent 40 years teaching high school English, not just teaching but investing in her students. She stayed after school to help with college essays, ran a poetry club out of her classroom, and organized free tutoring for struggling kids. She never phoned it in, never treated it as just a job. Her students had thrown her a surprise farewell party just 2 weeks prior, complete with a handwritten book of notes and memories. Even the janitor had cried. She had given 40 years to education, and she had given even more to her children. She helped each one through college, paid for their textbooks, covered the down payment on Jenna's first car, watched Oliver's kids every other weekend for 2 years while he sorted out his divorce. She never once asked for anything in return. Not because she didn't need anything, but because she thought that was what love looked like. Selfless, invisible, unconditional. Now she was beginning to realize she had made herself too invisible. The lump in her throat rose as she cut a slice of the cake, not because she wanted to eat it, but because something about slicing into it made the betrayal feel real. The icing clung to the knife like guilt. She sat alone at the dining room table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted a forkful to her mouth. It was too sweet, artificial, like the promises she had started to believe. That night, as the uneaten food cooled in foil-covered trays and the candles stayed unlit, Margot made a decision. She would not cry herself to sleep. She would not call them to ask why they didn't show up. She wouldn't beg for attention. Not anymore. Instead, she opened her laptop. It was old, slow, and the spacebar stuck, but it still worked. She typed into the search bar, "Starting a business after retirement." She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe a sign. Maybe a way to prove, if only to herself, that she still mattered. What she found instead was a story. A short article about a woman in Oregon who began selling homemade candles out of her garage at age 70. Another story about a retired Marine who turned his gardening hobby into a thriving landscaping service. And another about a former librarian who started selling cross-stitch kits online at 68 and built a community of over 10,000 people. Margot's heart stirred. She didn't have candle wax or military training or an embroidery machine, but she did have something. Something she hadn't talked about in a long time. Quilting. Her mother taught her when she was 9, sitting on a squeaky wooden stool while learning how to thread a needle. It had always been their thing. Rainy Saturdays with mismatched fabric, tiny scissors and sweet tea on the side. As life got busy, she quilted less, but never forgot. Over the years, she'd made baby blankets, wedding gifts, graduation presents. Friends often joked that she had enough fabric to open a boutique. Maybe now was the time. Margot closed her laptop, stood up from the table, and walked to the hallway closet. She pulled out the dusty sewing machine, ran her fingers over its chipped surface, and brought it back to the dining room table, pushing aside the leftover plates and wine glasses that no one had touched. She would start tonight. Not out of revenge. Not out of spite. But out of rebirth. Margot sat at her dining room table that night, her sewing machine humming quietly as the sky outside darkened. Fabric scraps lay across every surface, swirls of floral patterns, soft pastels, bold jewel tones she had collected over the years, just in case. For once, just in case had finally arrived. The first quilt she made wasn't perfect. Some lines were crooked, the edges uneven, but it felt like hers. Not a gift, not a favor, not a project done on behalf of someone else. It was the first thing she had created purely for herself in decades. She took a photo with her phone, uploaded it to a website she had read about earlier, Etsy, and listed it for $85. Under shop name, she typed the words that had suddenly come to her like a whisper. Threaded Grace. Her hands trembled a bit as she hit publish. No one bought it that night, or the next day, or the one after that. But for the first time in a long while, Margot didn't care. She found herself waking up with a new rhythm. Her mornings began with black coffee and soft jazz on the radio. She started stitching by 9 a.m. and often didn't stop until evening, taking breaks only to stretch her legs, check orders, or tidy up her newly designated workroom. Once the dining room, now draped in color and purpose. Her kids still hadn't reached out. Not a word about missing the party.
No explanations. No apologies.
Just silence. Until day 5. That's when Jenna called. Hey Mom. Her voice was light, casual, as if nothing had happened. Any chance you're free Saturday? The girls have ballet and our sitter bailed. Margot paused, the thread in her hand frozen mid-stitch. I thought you had plans Friday, she said evenly. There was a pause on the other end. Huh. Oh yeah. Something came up. I forget what it was. Of course she forgot. Margot didn't argue. She simply said she wasn't available and wished Jenna well. That was the first time Jenna sounded surprised. A little off balance. Margot ended the call and went back to quilting. By week 3, something shifted. Her first quilt sold to a woman in North Carolina. The next week, a woman in Oregon placed an order for 2. Then came a flood of small messages in her Etsy inbox. My daughter just left for college. This will be her comfort blanket. My mom passed away 2 years ago. This reminds me of her style. Is there any way you can make one in soft lavender and sage? Those were my grandma's favorite colors. Margot read each one slowly, sometimes twice. She responded thoughtfully, personalized each thank you note, and began sewing with purpose again. But this time it wasn't about being useful. It was about being seen. Her kids still hadn't asked about her retirement. But she didn't need them to. She was building something. And they were starting to notice. It was a Saturday afternoon when Ben stopped by unannounced. That alone raised Margot's eyebrows. Ben was an accountant who didn't so much as sneeze without scheduling it first. She was in leggings, a hoodie, her hair tied back in a bandana, surrounded by half-packed quilt orders and stacks of shipping envelopes. Her kitchen table was buried under fabric, her laptop open to a label printing site. He stood in the doorway, scanning the room. Wow, you've got a lot going on. Margot smiled calmly.
Ido.
Business is doing well. He nodded slowly. Still doing that quilt thing? That quilt thing just shipped to 12 states this week.
Ben blinked.
Oh, that's great. Do you need any help? With finances or shipping or I don't know logistics? She narrowed her eyes slightly. Why would I? He shrugged. Just checking in. You've been quiet in the group chat. Jenna said she was worried. Worried, Margot echoed. Funny. No one was worried the night I sat alone at my own retirement party. That shut him up. He left 20 minutes later after an awkward goodbye, offering once again to help with budgeting, if she ever needed it. Margot closed the door behind him gently and locked it. That week, Jenna stopped by, this time with the twins in tow. Margot served lunch, let the kids play in the den, and walked Jenna through her newest design. A patchwork quilt inspired by spring gardens. "It's beautiful, Mom," Jenna said. "You've really gone all in on this, huh?" "I have," Margot replied. "It's more than a hobby now." Jenna's smile tightened. "Just don't overdo it, okay? Retirement's supposed to be about relaxing." There was a tone there, not cruel but patronizing. Margot heard it loud and clear. That evening after they left, Margot noticed something strange. Her office door, normally closed when she was out of the room, was open, slightly ajar. One of her notebooks was turned to a page she hadn't left it on. Her receipts were still there. Inventory untouched. But something was off. She started locking that door the next day. Then came the subtle shifts in the family group chat. "Ben, running a business at your age must be a lot. You sure you're keeping track of taxes?" "Jenna, found this fun retirement group on Facebook. Looks like something you'd enjoy more than Etsy stress." Margot didn't respond. Instead, she sewed. Each quilt now carried something deeper, not just color and cloth but statements. Pieces with names like missed milestones, soft strength, and threaded boundaries. She photographed each one herself, added poetic descriptions, and sent them across the country with handwritten tags. By month 2, she had shipped to 17 states. By month 3, she had waitlists. And all the while, her children grew more interested. One evening, Ben came by with his wife Danielle. Danielle had never been warm. But that night, she was almost glowing. "I think it's great that you found something you love, Margot," she said over dinner. "Not everyone adjusts well to retirement." "Thank you," Margot said, raising an eyebrow. "But don't you ever worry about making mistakes? You know, at this age, judgment isn't always what it used to be." The air turned cold. Margot stared at her calmly. "I managed 30 years of classroom budgets without a calculator. I think I'll be fine." Danielle chuckled. "Just looking out for you." That night, Margot couldn't sleep. Something about that conversation rang in her head like an alarm. The next morning, she checked her Wi-Fi settings. There, blinking on her router, was an unfamiliar device name, NestHub_0548. She didn't own a Nest device. Her heart pounded. Margot's fingers flew across her keyboard. She accessed the device logs, traced connection histories, and scanned the names tied to it. And that's when it began to unravel. The blinking light on the router was no longer just a technical hiccup. It was a warning. Margot stared at the unfamiliar Nest Hub entry on the device list, her fingers trembling slightly as she clicked through the router logs. It had been connected every day for the last 6 weeks. Quietly, stealthily, she double-checked the IP history. Activity during times when she was asleep. Other times when she was out. Footage was being uploaded somewhere. She didn't own a Nest Hub. She hadn't installed anything, which meant someone else had. Margot stood from her desk slowly, her ears ringing. Her first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a neighbor accidentally connected, maybe a tech mistake. But that idea faded quickly. Her network was locked. Her password was unique. And the moment she saw the MAC address tied to a shared family email used years ago for cloud photo albums, the cold truth settled in. Her own children had access to her network. Her privacy. Her life. Her knees weakened. She had to sit again. But instead of tears, a storm brewed in her chest. Controlled. Furious. Focused. She spent the next 3 hours scanning every room in the house. The living room. Bedrooms. Kitchen. Laundry room. And then she saw it. A vent cover in the hallway, slightly off angle. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. She grabbed a stool, climbed up, and gently tugged at the cover. It came off with unsettling ease. Inside, nestled behind the slats, was a small black device, about the size of a deck of cards. A tiny lens gleamed faintly under the hallway light. A camera. Margot backed away, the cover still in her hands. Her mind reeled. How long had it been there? What had it seen? Who had been watching? She kept searching. A framed photo in the living room, a gift from Ben last Christmas, had a strange thickness to it. Too heavy for a print. She pried it open with a butter knife. Another camera. By the time she reached her bedroom, her stomach was in knots. She stared up at the smoke detector above her bed. A replacement Jordan had installed after saying hers was too outdated. She climbed the stool again and gently twisted it open. It wasn't a smoke detector. It was a shell. Inside, another hidden camera pointed directly down at the bed. Her sanctuary. Her private space. Violated. Margot sat on the floor with the 3 devices laid out before her. The shock numbed her at first. Then came waves of disgust, betrayal, and anger. Not confusion. Not heartbreak. She had given her children every benefit of the doubt over the years. This was deliberate. The next morning, she called a local tech consultant who specialized in digital security for older adults. A young man named Darren arrived at noon. She told him as little as possible, only that she suspected unauthorized access and needed a full sweep. Within an hour, he confirmed her worst fears. Someone had synced remote Nest devices using an old family account. The cameras had been live for at least 2 months. Recordings were being stored to cloud servers accessible to anyone with the proper credentials. When Darren showed her the user access history, there were 3 frequent users: Ben, Jenna, and Danielle. Darren's hands shook slightly. "Ms. Harlow," he said, "I've seen a lot of odd setups, but this is a violation of your digital and personal rights. You need to talk to someone legally." She nodded quietly, her mind already sprinting ahead. That evening, Margot made 3 copies of the access logs, screenshots, and photographs of the hidden devices. She labeled each folder with their names. Then she sent a message in the family group chat. "Dinner at my place Sunday at 6. I have some updates to share about the business. Hope you can all make it." They all replied enthusiastically within 10 minutes. Of course they did. Sunday arrived with too much sunshine for the storm that was coming. Margot set the table like she used to. Pot roast, green beans, warm bread, and her famous apple pie. Not to impress them, but to remind herself she still knew how to host. To command a room. They arrived on time, smiling wide. Ben brought wine. Jenna brought her twins, who immediately scattered down the hall. Danielle wore a new dress and complimented the smell of dinner. Margot served them with calm, casual grace. She let them eat, chat, compliment her quilting empire. Then over dessert she stood. "There's something I want to show you all," she said. She walked to the TV, plugged in a USB drive and clicked play. The screen showed grainy footage of her in the kitchen, pouring tea, humming. Then a voice off screen. "Jenna. She still doesn't know."
Ben, nope.
"Just keep clearing it when you visit. She doesn't check the logs." "Jenna. I still say we just talk to her. You know how she gets with her sewing obsession." Ben. "And what?" "Let her blow the inheritance on thread and pie tins." Laughter. Margot paused the footage. The silence in the room was loud. Then she handed them each a folder. Inside were the logs, the device histories, the Nest account access names, the photos of the cameras. No one spoke, until Ben finally muttered, "What is this?" "You tell me," Margot replied softly. Danielle's face went pale. Jenna's hands trembled. "Mom, it's not what you think," Jenna whispered. "We were just trying to make sure you were okay. You've been isolating, obsessed with this shop. We just wanted to protect you." Margot's voice was calm but firm.
No.
"You wanted to control me. You didn't come to my retirement party. You didn't ask how I was doing. You spied on me, judged me, mocked me, in my own home." Ben looked stunned. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "It did," Margot interrupted. "And I won't let it happen again." She pulled out 3 more envelopes. Cease and desist letters. Legal ones. Effective immediately. You are not to access any of my accounts, my home, my data, or my network without written permission. Any violation will result in formal legal action. Danielle gasped. "You're suing your own children?" "I'm protecting myself," Margot said, standing taller than she had in years. "From people who chose surveillance over honesty." The room fell still. "You're free to be in my life," she added, "if you respect my boundaries. If not, then you're free to leave it too." Her children didn't argue. They couldn't. 15 minutes later, they were gone. The house was quiet again. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was hers. After the door closed behind her children, Margot didn't collapse. She didn't sob or scream. She simply stood still, surrounded by empty plates, untouched wine, and the smell of roast lingering in the air. The same living room that once held family photos and echoes of laughter now held something stronger. The imprint of her voice, finally heard. She packed away the dishes in silence, not with sadness, but with clarity. Every motion was deliberate, grounding. The folded napkins, the untouched pie, the faint whir of the fridge humming in the background. It all felt oddly sacred, like the room itself was exhaling for the first time. That night, she slept without checking the router light. She didn't dream. But when she woke, sunlight stretched across her quilted bedspread, the real kind of light. Not artificial blue from hidden lenses. Not cold oversight disguised as concern. Just honest morning light. And that was the first morning she began planning her exit. Margot had lived in that house for over 30 years. It had been her fortress during widowhood, her workspace, her sanctuary. But now it felt contaminated. Not by mold or dust, but by betrayal. By the knowledge that the walls had eyes not her own. So she started packing. Not in haste, not in anger. But with freedom. Her sewing machine was wrapped in wool and placed gently in a padded crate. Her fabrics, sorted by color, were folded with care. She boxed up her mother's tea set, the journals she kept since her 20s, and the sketchbooks of quilt designs never stitched. Each item she packed was a thread cut from her old life, and each one made room for something new. She called a local realtor named Holly and explained her decision. "Are you sure, Miss Harlow?" Holly asked kindly. "It's a beautiful property. Great history." "I'm sure," Margot said. "It needs new memories. I'm ready for mine." She found a modest condo on the quiet edge of town. 2 bedrooms, large windows, and a small balcony that faced the morning sun. The building had no stairs, just a gentle elevator and warm hallways that smelled like fresh paint and old stories. She moved in by the end of the month. And for the first time in years, Margot breathed without fear. No cameras. No guilt. No expectation of performance. Just peace. She turned the second bedroom into a studio. Hung spools of thread on the wall like art. Created a photo backdrop for finished quilts. Labeled shelves for packaging materials and customer thank you cards. Her Etsy shop, Threaded Grace, blossomed. Orders that once trickled in now came in waves. She sewed while listening to jazz, packed orders while sipping cinnamon coffee, and wrote handwritten notes for each customer. Notes like, "May this quilt bring you warmth in every way." Or, "For your daughter, may she always feel wrapped in your love." One day, she received a message from a woman in Illinois. "My mom passed last winter. Your quilt smells like her. Thank you." Margot cried for the first time in weeks. But not from pain. From purpose. Meanwhile, she wasn't just rebuilding her business. She was reclaiming her life legally. With her lawyer's help, she revoked all previous power of attorney documents. She removed Ben as co-signer from her bank accounts and locked down her online data behind layers of security. 2-factor authentication. Encrypted backups. A physical safe for important documents. She even created a new will. Not as punishment, but as protection. In her will, she left a generous donation to a nonprofit that provided digital privacy advocacy for seniors. And a special endowment for the local community center to fund quilting classes for older women seeking connection and skill. She also created a tech boundaries guide, a PDF her lawyer would send to the family if they ever challenged her mental capacity again. No ambiguity. No loopholes. Just clarity. One Thursday morning, while watching the sun rise over the mountains, Margot received a message from Jenna. "I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't realize how far we'd gone. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do miss you." Margot didn't reply. Not yet. She forwarded the message to her therapist and journaled instead. In her journal she wrote, "Missing someone isn't a free pass. Love without respect is just control in a warm coat." That weekend, she held a soft opening for her new quilt studio. Not a big event, just a few neighbors. Holly from real estate, and Carmen, a fellow senior artisan she met in an online group. They drank lemonade, toured the space, and touched the colorful fabrics with reverence. "This is incredible," Carmen said. "You've made something from the ashes." Margot smiled. "More like from the scraps. But yes, I've stitched a new pattern." That night, Margot sat on her balcony with a cup of tea. Across her lap was her latest creation. A quilt made from discarded pieces of old family blankets, cut apart and reassembled with bold new colors. She named it Threaded Boundaries. It wasn't a quilt of rage. It was a quilt of survival, of reclaiming space, of choosing peace over permission. And as the stars blinked above her, unmonitored and real, Margot felt something better than closure. She felt steady. "Would you like me to continue with section 5? The stitch circle. Another 1,000 words?"
Bạn đã nói.
"Continue writing me part 5, 1,000 words."
Chat đã nói.
Here is section 5. The stitch circle of Margot's story. Approximate 1,000 words. Continuing her journey of independence, healing, and new community. 3 months had passed since Margot's quiet confrontation and the birth of her new life. The studio was no longer just a room with shelves and fabric. It had become a living part of her, filled with laughter, rustling thread, and purpose. But even with growing sales and her condo filled with warmth, something still tugged at her gently. The desire to connect with others who had walked the same lonely road. So she posted in a few online senior quilting forums, looking for a small group of women to share stories and stitches. "Beginners welcome. Let's heal and create together." She didn't expect much. But within 2 days 12 women replied. A week later she had a circle of 6 who lived nearby, women with silver hair, quiet hearts, and years of unspoken stories. They met every Thursday in Margot's studio. She pushed the work tables aside and arranged a loose circle of folding chairs and cushions, a thermos of coffee, a plate of lemon bars, a woven basket in the center filled with fabric scraps, spools of thread, and sewing kits. On the first day, the air was stiff, uncertain. But Margot opened with simplicity. "We all come from somewhere. We've all been made to feel small. But here we sew bigger." The women smiled. And the stitching began. There was Dorothy, 78, a widow who had lost touch with her grandchildren after a messy estate dispute. Carolyn, 67, recently divorced after 40 years. Her husband had run off with their financial planner. Marcia, 72, who didn't say much, but whose hands moved with muscle memory. Each stitch a silent scream released. Then there was Gloria, 69, who always brought a different herbal tea and liked to hum while she pinned fabric. And finally Ivy, 65, the youngest, an introvert with bright green reading glasses and a knack for detail. She rarely spoke unless prompted, but when she did, everyone listened. By the 3rd week they had a name. The Stitch Circle. It wasn't just about sewing. It was a place where dignity got mended. One line of thread at a time. Margot taught them how to cut clean angles, how to layer stories into fabric, how to turn memory into motif. They taught her how to listen without offering solutions. Each week one woman shared a patch, a piece of cloth and the memory behind it. They pinned them to a large corkboard labeled, "What We Carried." Dorothy brought a piece from her late husband's flannel shirt. "He was never affectionate," she said, fingers trembling. "But he wore this every winter for 30 years. Marcia stitched a corner from a hospital gown. "For the child I lost," she whispered. No one spoke. They just nodded and sewed. Carolyn presented a swatch from an old tablecloth, the one she used every Christmas until the kids stopped coming. "It held more holidays than people," she said. By the end of the month, the board was full. But they didn't stop. They added a second, then a third. One afternoon, after everyone had gone home, Margot stood in front of the board, her fingers lightly brushing over the cloth. Each square was a quiet rebellion, proof that even broken hearts had texture. That pain, when given purpose, became something beautiful. Inspired, she decided to launch a new product line on her shop, Story Quilts. Each quilt would be named after a truth from the Stitch Circle. One was called Widow's Winter. Another, Divorced but Dignified. A third, Empty Chairs, Full Heart. She took professional photos, wrote honest descriptions, and shared snippets of the stories, with permission. Orders flew in. One reviewer wrote, "This quilt made me cry. It reminded me of my mother, who passed in February. Thank you for preserving her." Another said, "Your stitching is like scripture. Honest, healing, human." But it wasn't just the buyers who found healing, it was the makers. By mid-fall, Margot had converted the second bedroom closet into a supply bank for the Stitch Circle. Fabric donations came in from local shops. A retired tailor dropped off bolts of unused silk. Even Holly, her real estate agent, donated buttons from her grandmother's collection. Then came the email from the local bookstore. "Hi Margot, we came across your shop and were blown away. We're starting a community storytelling month. Would you be open to hosting a quilting workshop? Focused on memory and meaning?" Margot stared at the screen for a long time. She had taught teenagers for 40 years. But adults? Her peers? Her first reaction was doubt. But her second was stronger. "Yes, I'd love to. Let's call it Mend." The first workshop had 15 people. They met in a sunlit room behind the bookstore. Surrounded by fabric, coffee, and stories. Margot stood at the front, heart pounding. She looked at the expectant faces, some old, some young, all waiting. She took a breath and said, "Every quilt starts with scraps. So do most of us. But scraps can be sewn into something whole." Hands moved. Scissors snipped. Tears were shed. And not one was ashamed. By the end of the class, people lingered. They exchanged numbers. They hugged. Mend became a weekly event. Margot wasn't just teaching quilting anymore. She was helping people put themselves back together. The Stitch Circle grew, quietly, steadily. They started a newsletter, just a monthly email with photos, member stories, and quilt ideas. People from out of state asked to join virtually. Gloria's niece in North Carolina helped set up a Facebook group. Ivy created a logo. Carolyn hosted a pop-up at her church. They even started a tradition. Once a season, they donated a group quilt to someone in need. A widow, a runaway teen, a hospice patient. Each quilt came with a note, stitched by women who remember. "You are not alone." Margot kept each thank you letter in a box labeled proof. One chilly November morning, as frost settled on the condo's windows, Margot sat in her studio sipping cinnamon coffee. The sewing machine hummed beside her. On the wall hung a new quilt, one she made just for herself. It wasn't for sale. It wasn't even signed. It was titled simply, "Start Again." And in the bottom corner, stitched in small thread, were 5 words that told her whole story. Freedom, boundaries, fabric, fire, me. She didn't need applause. She didn't crave forgiveness. What she had now was stronger than both. Legacy, community, peace. And thread by thread, she wasn't just mending quilts anymore. She was mending lives. Starting with her own. The air was cooler now. Winter had crept in quietly, laying a silvery hush over the city. But inside Margot's condo, there was nothing cold. Her living room was bathed in the warm glow of soft lamps, walls lined with bolts of fabric in earthy tones. The place smelled of cinnamon, chamomile, and something faintly floral. Her mother's old perfume, dabbled into a quilt square now framed on the wall. Business was booming. What started as a quiet act of rebellion, one woman selling homemade quilts on Etsy, had become a fully fledged enterprise. Margot had rebranded everything under a name that still made her smile. Patch and Purpose. The phrase had come to her during a late-night workshop session. One of the women in the Stitch Circle, Dorothy, had brought in a small fabric square stitched with the words, "Your pain has a purpose." Margot stared at it for a long while. When she got home that night, she logged onto her laptop and registered the new business name. Felt right. Honest. Rooted. She updated her site, redesigned her labels, and printed new care cards for each order. This quilt was stitched with purpose, for warmth, memory, and healing. Thank you for letting us be part of your story. She never used I, even though she made most of the quilts herself, because it wasn't just her anymore. She was building something shared, something communal. Purpose was in every patch. The expansion. With orders growing beyond what one woman could keep up with, Margot decided to hire help. But not just anyone. She wanted people who understood the heart of it. So she reached out to the stitch circle first. Marcia, always the quietest, stepped forward. "I'd like to do packaging," she said one Thursday evening. "I'm not fast with stitching anymore. But I'm neat. And I like wrapping things." Margot smiled. "You're hired." Carolyn offered to handle customer service emails. "I used to be a secretary," she said. "I can type 60 words a minute, and I'm good with softening blunt messages." Even Ivy got involved, creating digital templates for quilt designs and managing the growing Facebook page, which now had nearly 5,000 followers. They shared behind-the-scenes photos, workshop stories, and notes from customers. Margot began posting weekly reflections, little essays about aging, starting over, family wounds, and sewing as storytelling. People resonated. Comments poured in. One woman wrote, "I'm 72. My children barely speak to me. I thought I was alone until I found your page. Thank you for showing me we're still powerful." The quilt that started a movement. It was a Tuesday when Margot stitched the quilt that would change everything. The idea came from a phone call, one of those tense, dry conversations with Jordan. He had called to check in, asking how the business was going. When Margot shared that she'd passed 1,000 orders and had just done a collaboration with a veterans organization, there was a long pause. Then he said, "So you're really still doing that little fabric thing, huh?" It wasn't cruel, just dismissive, and that hurt more. After the call, Margot sat in her sewing room until midnight. She pulled navy rust and ash gray fabric. She created sharp angles, messy spirals, jagged lines, the opposite of her usual gentle patterns. She stitched phrases into the corners. Not a hobby. Not fragile. Not invisible. At the center, she appliqued a silhouette of a woman holding scissors in one hand and a thread spool in the other, standing on a cracked pedestal. It was called Still Standing. She posted it online with the caption, "For every woman dismissed as delicate, overlooked as past her prime, or patronized into silence, we are still standing, sharper than ever." It went viral. Within days, Patch and Purpose was featured on 3 quilting blogs, 1 senior empowerment podcast, and even got a nod from a lifestyle columnist in the Salt Lake Tribune. Orders flooded in. People didn't just want to buy, they wanted to share. Share their stories, their patches, their comebacks. Margot began including a simple form on her website. Want your quilt to tell a story? Write it here. And so they did, hundreds of stories. Abuse survivors, widows, estranged mothers, women who left marriages at 60, women who launched side hustles after 70. Margot created a special collection titled Voices in Thread. Each quilt was paired with a first name, a short note, and a unique pattern. The gallery event, with encouragement from the Stitch Circle and a gentle nudge from her new neighbor, Ed, a retired painter with a gallery connection. Margot agreed to host a small exhibit. They called it The Second Thread. The event was hosted at the local library's community room. 24 quilts lined the walls. Each had a tag that told its story. There were folding chairs, soft music, tea and cookies, and a room full of women and some men who hadn't felt celebrated in decades. At the end of the night, Margot gave a short speech. "I used to think a mother's legacy was built through children. But I've learned it can be built through courage too. Through doing the thing no one expects you to do. Like starting over at 66. The applause wasn't loud. It was long. And a few women cried. Letters from the past. One day, after coming home from a Stitch Circle meeting, Margot found a pale envelope in her mailbox. No return address. Just her name. Margot Elaine Turner. Inside was a letter from Melissa. Not an email. Not a text. A letter. Handwritten. "Mom, I know I lost your trust. I know I hurt you. I've read about Patch and Purpose and cried. Not because you did it without us, but because you did it in spite of us. I didn't understand then how much we diminished you. I do now. I'm sorry. I'm trying to change. I hope one day you'll let me show you. But if you never do, I understand. You're incredible. Love, Melissa." Margot held the paper close to her chest. Not to forgive. Not to reopen wounds. But to feel. To acknowledge the shift. She didn't respond right away. She didn't have to, because forgiveness wasn't always immediate. Sometimes it was the quiet decision to not close the door all the way. The legacy lives. Margot turned 67 in spring. She didn't throw a big party, just invited the Stitch Circle, a few local artisans, and Ed, who brought his signature banana bread. They raised a toast in her studio, surrounded by quilts and laughter and fabric bins full of memory. Later that evening, Margot stood alone by the open window, listening to the breeze. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't have predicted. Not just the business, but her heart, her habits, her hope. She had gone from ignored to independent, from monitored to magnificent. And as the sun dipped behind the Wasatch Mountains, she whispered to herself, "This isn't the end of my story. This is the purpose I've been patching toward all along." Have you ever reached a point in life where you asked, "Is this all there is?" Margot's journey reminds us that even after decades of giving, to children, to a job, to a family, there's still more waiting for us, if we're brave enough to reclaim it. Her story isn't just about betrayal or privacy. It's about visibility, value, and voice. As we age, the world too often tells us to shrink, to settle, to surrender our autonomy for the comfort of others. But what if your most powerful chapter is still unwritten? What if purpose doesn't end with retirement, but begins when you stop asking for permission to matter? Margot's path asks us to consider, what does it mean to live boldly when no one is watching? Or worse, when they're watching without respect? Would you choose peace over pleasing others? Would you risk distance to protect your dignity? Her quilts weren't just fabric, they were stitched declarations. I am still here. I still count. So ask yourself, are you living a life stitched with intention? Or just going along with the seams someone else designed for you? Because the truth is, it's never too late to begin again. Not at 60. Not at 70. Not even after everyone forgets your birthday. Your next chapter doesn't need permission. Just purpose.